Good morning / afternoon, year 5. Very hot today. I think if we go on our daily exercise today, we'll have to go to the enclosure or something somewhere shady, because it is very hot. Hope you're staying cool. You never know. Could get some water fights out in the garden. So we're halfway through a chapter about Hazel when she started at Deep Dean. So we will see what happened there, and then hopefully maybe find out a little bit more about our story. When we come to the end, do send me an email if you have any books that you think people might want to listen to. Haven't really decided what to read next, so let me know. 2 days into my new act, I was feeling very smug with myself. In science, I wriggled down in my seat and tried to look as don't care as possible, copying Lavinia, who was hunched over with her arms crossed and her feet curled round her chair legs in a way that, according to Miss Lappet, was extremely dangerous and could lead to broken limbs or worse. When Miss Bell came in, I began to sit up straight before I remembered I mustn't. To make up for it, I dropped a Bunsen burner and then said that Newton shot an apple at his son, which made Beanie squeal with laughter. "Whatever's happened to you today, Hazel?" asked Miss Bell, raising an eyebrow. "I think you've been spending too much time around Beanie." Beanie flushed deep red and looked hurriedly at her textbook, and most of the second form glared at Miss Bell. There was one person, though, not looking at Miss Bell. When I glanced over at Daisy, I saw that her blue eyes were fixed on me in an all-over searching way that made me turn almost as pink as Beanie and look down again as quickly as I could. I carefully spent the rest of the lesson fixing my eyes on everything but Daisy's bench and answering no more questions at all. As punishment for the Bunsen burner, Miss Bell made me tidy the lab at the end of our lesson. By the time I was finished, I thought everyone would have hurried away to Latin, but the door banged to behind me, and when I turned around, there was Daisy, leaning against a bench, waiting for me. I tried to walk past her. "Stop there," said Daisy, and she stuck her foot out in front of me. She had mud on her sock. "What do you think you're doing?" "I'm going to Latin," I said rather weakly. "Not what I meant," said Daisy. "Look at your shoes. Until 2 days ago, you might have been in the military, and now it looks like you've been rolling around in mud." "I fell over," I said, more weakly still. All of a sudden, Daisy launched herself off the bench and crouched down at my feet. Her breath made my ankle itch, and I wriggled. "You've cut this shoelace," she declared after a moment, squinting up at me accusingly. "And all the scratches on your shoes are new as well. Before this week, I'd never seen you with a button out of place. I was beginning to think they hadn't heard of dirt in the East. What are you playing at?" That upset me. "I'm fitting in," I snapped. "Just like you do." Daisy bobbed up again. She was taller than me, and she looked down at me ferociously. I backed away, thinking about that she was about to do something awful. "Whatever do you mean?" she asked. "I've seen you," I said. "You pretend not to know the answer when I know you do all the time, just to make sure no one calls you a swot. Really, you're cleverer than any of us. I've been watching you, and I know it's true. And if you tell anyone that I cut off my own lace, I'll tell everyone about you." I expected Daisy to be furious. Instead, she laughed. "I doubt anyone would listen to you," she said. "You ought to be more careful, by the way. You're making a dreadful job of it. You can't just launch into this sort of thing with no warning. People don't change character like the outside of silly made-up stories. If you're going to do it, you need to be more subtle about it. You don't want people to look at you unless you're very good at acting." "But people look at you," I said. "I," said Daisy, "am very good at acting. But you mustn't tell anyone, or I shall have to kill you. Now hurry up, or we'll be late for Latin." And with that, she put out her hand, hooked her arm through mine, and dragged me out of the laboratory. And that was how Daisy Wells and I became best friends. Part 7. We run into trouble. Good. And there's a little hockey stick next to it. Wonder if that's got anything to do with it. Daisy and I are still not talking, and I've been wondering whether the case will be the Detective Society's last. Seeing King Henry yesterday made me certain that justice has not yet been done, and now I feel sure that something has gone very wrong with Miss Tennyson's confession. I am worried. Today is Sunday, and this morning we broke up to find the day as grim and grey as I have been feeling. We all filed off to Sunday service in the hall under spattering dark clouds. Everyone cringed and scurried, and Daisy and Kitty darted between the drops together, arm in arm. Evidently, Daisy did not mind that she and I were not speaking. Miss Tennyson was not at Sunday service. That was not odd. If she had gone to the police after we left her yesterday, she would still be there now, arrested, in her cell, and waiting for the trial, I suppose. Or for the police to find Miss Bell's body. When I try to imagine what happens after someone confesses to murder, I can't seem to do it properly, I suppose because Daisy's books are so coy about it. But the really worrying thing was that the rest of the masters and mistresses were still behaving perfectly normally. It was as though they had not heard about Miss Tennyson confessing to a murder. Miss Hopkins, for example, was still wearing her smug, happy expression, while Miss Parker was sizzling with bottled-up rage. Mr. McLean's Sunday afternoon sermon was exactly as dull as it usually is, all about friendship. I thought of Daisy, bitterly. Good works and the importance of beautifying the world. I listened to it and felt as though I had come into the wrong sermon by mistake, and if I looked at the date, I would see that it was 5 weeks ago, or years and years in the future. The one began to play the hymn. As she stood up, Miss Lappet swayed. "Drunk again," whispered Kitty to Daisy, loud enough for me to overhear. "Hasn't she been bad this week? Rumour has it she's in mourning for the deputy job. I heard from one of the big girls that she went to confront Miss Griffith about it on Monday evening. They had an appointment straight after societies, and Miss Griffin finally told her that she hadn't a hope. Miss Lappet ran straight out of Miss Griffin's office, apparently, and has been on the demon drink ever since." "What?" I said, much too loudly. My heart had suddenly started pounding so hard I can feel it through my pinafore. "Scene, girls," snapped Mademoiselle, without turning around. I could not believe what I had just heard. Miss Lappet had only been in Miss Griffin's office for a few minutes. Her alibi had been wiped out, just like that, and now there was nothing to say that Miss Lappet had not been in the gym at the crucial time, pushing Miss Bell off the balcony. I slid a look at Daisy out of the corner of my eye and saw that she was very determinedly not looking back at me, but there was a worrying line creasing the top of her nose, and I could tell, just as certainly as if she had said it, that Daisy had finally realised just how wrong she was. After the service, we walked back up to house behind Matron, 2 by 2. I was next to Lavinia, who was being her usual lumpish, moody self, and all at once I decided that I could not bear arguing with Daisy any longer. We had to solve this mystery together. As soon as we were back up at house and safe in the noise of the common room, I ran up and seized her arm. "Daisy," I cried, "I'm sorry. I have been behaving like a beast." Daisy turned round to look at me with a strange expression on her face. I could not make it out. "Hazel," she said, after a moment, "I refuse your apology." I gaped at her. "Because," Daisy continued, lifting her chin proudly, "I was wrong, and so it should be me apologising." "But Daisy, Hazel, will you let me talk? Whether or not Miss Tennyson did it, there are too many things going on that don't fit my theory. You know that, and you told me so you were right." "I was thinking," I said, bracing myself for Daisy to ignore me again, "what if someone did the murder with Miss Tennyson? She and Miss Lappet, or she and Miss Parker, and King Henry's got to be involved somehow. I know it." To my surprise, Daisy nodded. "It is possible," she said. "Oh, Hazel, I've been a terrible Detective Society president. I ought to have listened to you instead of rushing around like a fool. Why haven't we heard about Miss Tennyson going to the police yet?" "I don't know," I said, beginning to worry all over again. "Do you think she's done a bunk?" Daisy made a face. "I hope she's done a bunk," she said, "because all the alternatives I can imagine are worse." We spent most of the rest of the day swapping theories, and although most of them were utterly silly, it was wonderful to have Daisy finally listening to me for a change. "Perhaps Miss Tennyson's in love with the one too," I said, "and she found out he'd done it and helped him cover up the crime." "Or perhaps she's the one's long-lost sister," said Daisy. It was after dinner, and she sprawled on her bed with one foot in its regulation white sock, waving in the air. I stared down at her. All right. I was only joking. What I meant to say is, perhaps King Henry is Miss Tennyson's long-lost daughter." "Oh, no need to hit me like that." "You aren't being serious," I told her. "Well, neither are you," said Daisy. "It'd be far more productive for you to do some secretary and write up what happened today." So I did. Going over it like this has made me worried all over again. If Miss Tennyson didn't go to the police, which seems more and more likely since none of us has heard about it, why didn't she? Has she simply done a runner, or has something else happened to her? I'm trying not to think about what something else could be. Strange turn of events there. Chapter 2. We know now that Miss Tennyson has not run away. On Monday morning, Daisy and I walked down to school together, friends again, to discover that things had gone badly wrong at Deep Dean. The first sign came at registration. On Mondays, it's usually Miss Tennyson who takes our register, but today, Mademoiselle rushed in 2 minutes late, looking flustered, and read off our names at such a terrific pace she forgot to roll her R's. I felt sick with worry. We filed out of the room for prayers, Mademoiselle pursing her lips in alarm and shooting us along with her hands flapping and shooing us along. I made it into the hall just as the one gave the organ its last few warning blares. When we passed Miss Lappet on the way to our seats, I could smell the drink wafting off her. Miss Griffin made her entrance while we stood still, shuffling along our row, and she stood and waited for us, glaring sternly down over the lectern. At last, when we were settled and there was nothing to be heard but our breathing, Miss Griffin cleared her throat. She leaned her hands against the lectern and stared down at us, and then she began to speak. Miss Griffin's morning lectures are like Miss Griffin herself, clean and rigorous and slightly frightening. They always made me feel sinkingly inadequate, as though I'm being spoken to by the voice of God. I know I'll be never as good as Miss Griffin assumes we all are, so it's terribly good of herself that she puts the rest of us to shame. At the end of the lecture came the weekly match scores. First hockey against St Charters, 7-8. Seconds netball against D Hill, 24-18. And then the general announcements. The Drama Society was performing King Lear. Donations were being taken for the RSPCA. Then a pause. We all looked up. Miss Griffin's serene forehead was creased. "And I am sorry to announce, girls, that over the weekend, Miss Tennyson suffered a terrible accident. She has been taken to hospital, but unfortunately there was nothing to be done. Girls, I am so sorry. Miss Tennyson is no longer with us." There was a frozen silence, and then everyone began to talk at once. Miss Griffin opened her mouth, closed it again with a wince, signalled to the one and the organ, and marched off stage. The one dropped his hands onto the keys with a smash, and everyone had to shriek at each other to be heard over the din. A few of the shrimps were crying. I cannot have been thinking straight, because it took me a moment to realise what Miss Griffin meant. No longer with us was just a very nice way of saying dead, and as soon as I realised that, I felt cold all over. Was it really true? An accident? It seemed simply too convenient. What if, my heart sang, Miss Tennyson had not been able to face lying in her confession to the police, for by now I was quite sure she would have been lying, although I had no idea why, and had taken another way out. People did it in books all the time, heroically and beautifully, and I know that Miss Tennyson believed in books. Daisy seized my arm. Her eyes were glittering. How can you look like that? I asked. Miss Tennyson's killed herself. Oh, Daisy, I think it's our fault. Killed herself? Said Daisy blankly. Oh, no, she didn't kill herself, and she didn't suffer an accident either. She's been murdered, just like you thought. Someone helped her with Miss Bell's murder, and now her accomplice has killed her. No, I gasped. Yes, said Daisy. It's the only thing that makes sense. But Daisy, even if someone else killed Miss Tennyson, it's still our fault. If we haven't told Miss Tennyson to go to the police, then she'd be alive. Daisy snorted. Well, it'll teach her to go about murdering people, she said. Is it our fault that she helped kill Miss Bell? Strictly, of course, she was right, but I still felt vilely responsible. Daisy does not understand this sort of thing because it is not logical, and I know perfectly well that somehow we had caused Miss Tennyson's death. But what should we do? I asked. Daisy looked at me as though I was mad. Do? She asked. The only thing we can do. Keep on until we catch Miss Tennyson's accomplice and solve both the murders, of course. Chapter 3. We were lucky our conversation was lost in the roar of the noise in the rest of the school. The masters, mistresses and prefects were trying to hush us up and shoo us out of the hall, but they could not possibly keep us all quiet. King Henry was not even trying. She was leaning against the back of a wooden bench, her face pale, and I was more certain than ever that she had something to do with this mystery. The whole school was in a panic. What had happened at our séance came back to everyone's minds with a vengeance. No matter what Miss Griffin had said about accidents, everyone decided that this was yet another murder. No one did any work all morning. In French, after struggling with us for 10 minutes, Mademoiselle threw up her hands, put a French composition on the board, took out Weldon's Ladies' Journal and left us to it. I can't believe that Miss Tennyson's been murdered too, said Kitty, just like Miss Bell, 2 in 2 weeks. They're both coming to come back and haunt the school, said Lavinia loudly to frighten Beanie. Just you wait. Beanie burst into tears. But I liked Miss Tennyson, she wailed. I don't want her to be murdered. Girls, shouted Mademoiselle, her French accent back with a vengeance. Miss Tennyson has not been murdered. Please go back to your compositions and let us have no more of this. Then she shook back her dyed hair, turned to the fashion in furs and ignored us again. The next lesson was maths. As we went into the room, I stared at Miss Parker nervously. Was she displaying any new signs of guilt? I couldn't see any exactly, but her cropped hair was sticking up like a brush, so I knew she must be troubled. She bawled at us to sit down in the most Sergeant Majorish voice, and then we went through maths problems rigorously. None of us could pay attention. We made the most fearful mistakes, and that made Miss Parker bawl at us even harder. At last, just before the end of the lesson, Beanie put her head in her hands and burst into tears, but Miss Parker didn't tell her to be quiet. Instead, she suddenly looked as though she was going to weep herself. Miss Parker, said Kitty as Beanie sobbed, what happened to Miss Tennyson? I'm sorry, Kitty, said Miss Parker in a husky voice. I don't know. I realised that I believed her. Miss Parker, for all her raging, was truly upset about Miss Tennyson's death. And not just upset, but confused. She didn't know what had happened any more than we did, and if that was true, it meant Miss Parker was not the murderer. But how was I going to prove that to Daisy? I looked over at Daisy. The small crease across the bridge of her nose had appeared again. I knew she was not upset about Miss Tennyson in the same way I was. Guilt slid straight off Daisy like butter. I don't imagine she's ever felt it properly. I could tell that she was planning something. Put your things away, girls, Miss Parker told us, still in the same lost voice. You may go to bun break early today. Immediately, Daisy leaned down to pick up her bag and straightened up again with a very loud, "Oh!" Several people jumped. What is it, Daisy? Asked Miss Parker. I think I found your earring, Miss Parker, said Daisy. It was lying on the floor next to my bag. Look. Miss Parker barely glanced at it. Not mine, Daisy, she said without interest as she swept our exercise books into a stack. Although it looks like the one's Mr. She stopped halfway through her sentence. Oh, never mind. Off you go, girls. As soon as we were out the room, Daisy seized my arm. She didn't do it, she said. I know, I said in great relief. Thank goodness you proved it. I didn't know how I would. And did you hear what Miss Parker said when you showed her the earring? Something about it looking like one of the ones Mr. I bet she meant the one. He's the only Mr. at Deep Dean who might be giving out earrings. Daisy clapped me on the back. Watson, she said, your detective talents continue to amaze me. I may end up promoting you. I nearly pointed out that since there was no one in the society but the two of us, it was quite difficult to see how I could be promoted. But for now, the bell rang for bun break. Miss Parker came out of the classroom behind us and hurried away. Oh, quick, follow her. She may not suspect anymore, but I still have a hunch that she may be important. That was a turn of events today. See what happens tomorrow. Make sure you're still staying safe. I look forward to seeing all of your persuasive letters tomorrow. See you later.